What the hell is happening in Iran? The simple fact is that the decision making in Washington is increasingly becoming impulse driven, dangerously impulse driven. Very strategic moves are being undertaken, apparently without much thought, without much analysis, without thinking the problem through. Take the example of what has happened in Venezuela. There is that classic phrase, fools Russian where angels fear to tread. We found that the entire plan of, capturing Maduro had not been thought through beyond the first stage. What next? Was apparently a big gap when things developed so fast. They rushed in, Maduro was captured, huge amount of bribes were paid to buy people off so that they could do it in a bloodless manner. But then the regime, Maduro's regime, is still intact in Venezuela. The vice president has taken over and she has said that they are not prepared to be a colony of the United States. You could still have guerrilla action, and the oil companies have refused to go in. Had the whole thing been thought through before this whole process was started? Now let's take a look at what the hell is happening in Iran. There is been a complete collapse, a total failure of a colored revolution in Iran. This colored revolution had been in the offing for many months. The CIA, the Mossad, the MI6 had all been working jointly to instigate a major street revolution in Iran, and it has completely fizzled out. The fact of the matter is that the Mossad had cultivated the Afghan refugees, had fed a lot of money, supplied a lot of money and weapons to the Afghan refugees. They were planning to use the Kurds in a major way. 300 armed Kurds were to infiltrate into Iran and create mayhem. But surprisingly, Turkey tipped off Iran, and Iran was able to slaughter these 300 Kurds as they were trying to make their way into Iran. Pakistan has been told by the United States to provide weapons and small arms in a very major way to the Baluch insurgents in Sistan, Baluchistan, and the southern portion of Iran. There were reports that there was a huge shipment of small arms which had reached Karachi, and unconfirmed reports state that Iran attacked it with drones and set that ship on fire. Thousands of the Iranian authorities are supposedly have recovered thousands upon thousands of these weapons in Sistan, Baluchistan and Bushehr. Some 40,000 to 50,000, 40,000 to 50,000 Starlink satellite terminals were smuggled into Iran so that they would be the basis of a major colored revolution. They would be helped to instigate a major colored revolution, spread propaganda and fake news, etc., to create a major crisis, generate a major crisis. The Chinese are said to have jammed these Starlink terminals. It looks like the Russians and the Chinese have learnt a great deal from these repeated colored revolutions in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, etc. And they have understood the playbook very well. What is the playbook? Impose heavy sanctions, painful sanctions on the people that, hurt the people, that destroy the economy, that create anger and angst, which the American CIA seeks to harvest by the means of these colored revolutions. A lot of these Starlink terminals were captured by the Iranians, and it appears that a lot of the Mossad intelligence agents and networks got uncovered in the June attack that they had launched on Iran. A lot of these were exposed, and the Iranians have acted swiftly, I think perhaps with the help of the Russians and the Chinese, to mop up these Mossad networks, and they don't seem to have worked. Most of them seem to have been uncovered, compromised, and the Russians are experts at having red orchestras. I mean, they create local networks, which try and invite intelligence intervention, and then, the whole network gets destroyed. Trump was riding high on hubris after he was able to capture Maduro, and his wife, and bring them to the United States in chains and handcuffs, etc. But he hadn't thought the entire Maduro episode through. Nothing seems to have been concretely planned on what next in Venezuela. But Trump was high on hubris, and he wanted to go ahead with the Iran imbroglio. Why? Why is Trump seeking external diversions in such a brazen, in such a imprudent manner, which could easily backfire and which could create serious problems for the United States? The Chinese say it is he wants to keep the attention off the Epstein files. He doesn't want the Epstein issue to come up, so he is seeking external digressions, even as Bill Clinton had chosen to attack in Serbia, Sarajevo, etc., to distract attention from the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Whatever it is, the levels of hubris are now becoming dangerous, extremely dangerous. Russia and China did not react in Venezuela because that is slap in America's backyard. America was, quite on strong ground in its own backyard. And we seem to see a kind of a modus vivendi between the three major powers of the globe in this multilateral global order, polycentric global order: America, Russia, and China. And all three principal antagonists seem to have agreed to one thing, not to mess around in each other's backyard. The Russians are very clear. They want to fight only one battle at a time, and they are not prepared to take on, further battles, especially so far away from home, right in the American backyard. Are the Americans keen to fight in East Europe? I don't think so. Not at all. They didn't put a single boot on the ground in Ukraine. They didn't even enforce a no-fly zone. Are the Americans prepared to take on China in its own backyard? Mess around in Taiwan, Senkaku Islands, or the South China Sea? I don't think so. It is over 7,000 kilometers from the American mainland. It is just 100 kilometers from the Chinese mainland. and taking on a rising military power like China in its own backyard would be a very serious error of judgment as far as the Americans are concerned. So, in their national security strategy, they have made it quite apparent that we are not going to go in and take on the Chinese in their own backyard militarily. We would want our allies to do the heavy lifting. We would want them to shed the blood. We would want them to throw in the bulk of the forces like Ukraine and fight to the last Ukrainian, like the Ukrainians fight to the last Ukrainian against the Chinese. I don't see any of the neighbors doing that. Not Japan, not Korea, not Philippines. I don't think they are going to mess around if the Americans are going to stay out, if the Americans are just going to provide a nuclear umbrella, or they are going to just sell weapons. Sell weapons, not gift them any longer. So people, neighboring countries would be extremely foolish to attempt to take China on alone or to take Russia on alone in its own backyard. That seems to be the new modus vivendi. It's quite apparent that these three powers have decided not to mess around in their own backyards. Now, whose backyard is Iran? That is the critical question. It's not in the American backyard, quite obviously, but it is in an area which is crucial to the United States because of its energy resources. It is an area that is crucial to Russia. It is an area that is even more crucial to China, because almost 17 to 20% of Chinese energy resources are now coming from Iran. China is heavily invested for the long term. Long-term contracts have been signed with the Iranians for the supply of cheap oil. So, you are messing around with a security system in which the Russians and the Chinese are deeply invested. And if you disturb this security architecture, you cause pain, it could lead to unpredictable reactions, very unpredictable reactions. Russia has issued clear warnings to America and to Israel to stay out of Iran, not mess around with Iran. It told the Iranian Prime Minister, why did you not accept our personnel to man the air defense systems, especially the S-400s? Apparently, the Russians had offered to send their operatives to man the air defense system. It was Iran which had refused, because they were very confident that their own local stuff would be able to take care of the Americans and the Iranian attacks. It was a bit of a hubris on the part of Iran, but they have learned their lessons. It is being said that Russian military operatives are now operating the S-400s, and it is being rumored that a few days back, Iran had declared a total no-fly zone, completely emptied its airspace, and that is the time when the first probing attack came from the Americans, and 2 American fighter planes, F-35s, apparently were shot down. These reports are yet to be confirmed, but that is the speculation. Another interesting factor, all the Arab nations, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Gulf nations, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, etc., they all refused to let the Americans use their airspace or their bases. Why? Because Iran threatened them, we will not attack you, but most definitely we will attack the Americans' bases located on your soil, with concomitant problems, attendant problems to you and your population. They have chickened out. And they have clearly told the United States that we are not going to support an attack on Iran. They have advised the United States against such a foolish venture. Now, as I said, the Mossad, the CIA, the MI6 had put in place a very elaborate plan, but the whole plan seems to have unraveled, fizzled out. Most of the Mossad networks, intelligence networks, had been compromised during the June imbroglio last year, uncovered, and the Iranians have cracked down hard. The Afghans seem to have failed them. The Kurds couldn't get through. The plan was to use women activists. One women activist in particular is being mentioned, Nilofer, who seems to be some kind of a Mata Hari armed with Kalashnikovs, American shotguns, etc. And these agitationers, these armed agitators, had been instructed to fire upon, and they have fired upon the Iranian police, Pasji, etc., to provoke strong retaliation and provoke them into creating some kind of a mini genocide in Iran, which would then provide the pretext for American and Israeli intervention. Whatever it was, these plans seem to have flopped miserably. Yes, the people were agitated about the economic distress, but the Iranian regime, Pezeshkian, etc., reached out to the people and said, we are prepared to talk. We are prepared to take amelioratory measures, right? And it is only against the armed agitators that they were quite brutal and tough, as is their wont. This agitation now is quite clear, has fizzled out completely. This colored revolution has been an abject failure. To the contrary, the Iranians mobilized their supporters. The entire Iranian population rose up to support the regime, and mass demonstrations with about 3 million Iranians on the streets in support of the regime were staged in Tehran. That is the time Donald Trump was riding high on hubris, and every day he was making open boasts. I am going to get rid of this regime. I am going to uproot them, throw them into the Gulf of Hormuz, etc., etc. Very bellicose statements, full of hubris, etc. And then suddenly the Israelis warned him, don't go in now. That entire Iranian revolution has fizzled out. The colored revolution has failed. Nothing has happened to the IRGC. They are as strong as ever. And if you now go in, about 700 Iranian Fateh missiles, hypersonic missiles, could slam into Israel. And last time, these had proved to be very dangerously accurate. $50 billion worth of damage had been inflicted on Israel. Those are harsh military facts. Yes, we support Israel. We are deeply invested in Israel's security. But facts are facts. And the Israelis themselves were extremely worried because they do not have the countermeasures which can stop hypersonic cruise missile, nor does America, nor can American patriots stop a single hypersonic cruise missile from hitting its targets. So in great panic, apparently Netanyahu spoke to Donald Trump and asked him to hold his horses for the time being. With this sudden turn of events, Donald Trump consulted his military, and his chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, is reportedly said to have advised him that, look, we don't have the force levels right now. We were hoping, we were planning, the plans were based on a major upheaval in Iran, which would weaken the IRGC, which would weaken the their revolutionary guards, the army, which could sort of disrupt the missiles, which could give us an opportunity to, under cover of the crowds, to attack the missiles, to attack the nuclear facilities, etc. All that plan seems to have gone up in smoke. And therefore, if you still want to attack, we need to build up military force levels there. You forget building up military force levels. America had started evacuating personnel from Bahrain and the other Al Udeid, other air bases, because Iran had given a clear military threat that we will launch preemptive attacks on all American military bases and Israel. That is, unfortunately or fortunately, the situation on the ground. And therefore, the simple fact is, we were also quite surprised. In June, when the Americans had gone in, they had 2 aircraft carriers in the region. Right now, there is not a single aircraft carrier in the regions. Just 4 Aegis class destroyers and 1 submarine, which can fire Tomahawk cruise missiles. It was dangerous hubris to plan on taking on Iran with such curtailed force levels. So quite obviously, the American military, now that Donald Trump has gone out and painted himself into a corner, because now if he chickens out, if Trump chickens out again, there are the midterm elections coming. So he has led himself into serious cul-de-sacs. So what's going to happen in Iran? One possibility is that he will build up the force levels. Already the American aircraft carriers, Abraham Lincoln, has been steamed in from South China Sea, where it was stationed, and is heading towards the Gulf, may take about a week to reach there. Theodore Roosevelt, the other American aircraft carrier, Nimitz class, is also being rushed to the Persian Gulf. There is indications of a possible 3rd carrier being sent, because now that you have Donald Trump has put himself on a limb, he has to do something to keep Epstein off the newspaper headlines. And he has to keep the American population engaged till the midterm elections. So we find the talk on Greenland has touched new heights of bellicosity and aggression. Greenland seems to be a safe bet, because the weakest set of nations now are the hopeless nations of Europe. Unfortunate, once great colonial powers have been reduced to this, that Donald Trump is threatening them. There are hilarious comparisons that previously it was Russia which was posing a threat to Europe. Now it is the United States which is posing an even more immediate threat to Europe. So let us say, even if Trump decides to go into Iran in March or February, let us say at the earliest, what can he do? I don't see Trump putting boots on the ground. He has no stomach for body bags, nor has the United States, nor has his MAGA support base. No stomach for body bags. Therefore, Trumps like to do quick raids, quick in, quick out, low cost, no cost raids, casualty-less raids in which you can come and say, I did it, and take a bow. before the cameras and call it off. Is that what is likely in Iran? I'm afraid it would be a serious miscalculation. Iran is not in the American backyard. It is the backyard of China, and the Russians will not let Iran go down, because it would be a serious blow to their prestige if an ally like Iran, facing an existential crisis, was seen to be let down so hopelessly before an American invasion or attack. The Russians have made it clear in unequivocal terms, don't try this. They are providing a lot of cover to the Iranians, a lot of military support to the Iranians. There are reports that the Chinese have shipped in J-10C fighters along with fighter pilots. And should you mess around with Iran, the first thing that you can expect is about 700 missiles slamming into Israel. Israel's geographical size is very small. I don't think it would be a very wise thing for Israel to invite such an attack, especially when there are no counter measures. I would not advise it to our friends. There are no countermeasures with the Americans or with the Chinese or with the Russians for hypersonic cruise missiles, missiles that can alter course, which are not ballistic trajectories that can be intercepted. There were reports that there was a seismic event near Dimona, a kind of an earthquake, Richter 4 on the Richter scale or thereabouts. And it was being speculated that has Israel tested a nuclear bomb? I don't recommend even that option to our Israeli friends, because Iran, the sheer geographical size of Iran is far too big for one or two nukes to do anything. And more than one or two nukes, I don't think the world will countenance. You could cause some damage. What will it do? The Russians, the North Koreans, the Chinese could react in unpredictable ways. At the very least, they could give nuclear technology to Iran, and an Iranian nuclear weapon on a hypersonic missile aimed at Israel is not something that we in India would like to see happening, because it will affect our security, as simple as that. It is a messy situation in Iran, extremely messy, dangerous, very prone to accidental escalations of an unpredictable kind. Like I said, impulse-driven actions in Washington are now turning extremely dangerous. The United States was one country which had huge think tanks, very well endowed, intellectually endowed, think tanks and institutions that could do contingency planning of a very high order, that could think things through, and the level of intellectual analysis was extremely high. But unfortunately, that is in the past tense. It is in the past tense. Things are turning very dangerous with that impulse-driven daring do in Washington, when we start things without thinking them through without thinking of step 2, 3, 4. You start interventions without thinking of an exit strategy. A recent look or a look at American recent military history should strongly deter the United States from such thoughtless adventurism. You want to think things through and then go ahead? Well, the United States still is a declining power, but it still has the power to do a lot of damage. But the way they are going around, I see the damage only to the United States. You will just, with this reckless actions, you will force the rest of the world to bandwagon. RIC is already a reality, and India should now shed its fears and openly join the RIC camp and the BRICS camp for our own safety and protection against such impulse-driven actions from a declining power in Washington. It is an empire that is on the decline, and empires that are on the decline sometimes tend to act irrationally, recklessly. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.